Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Associate Professor Peter Crosthwaite from the University of Queensland, and today I'm going to be presenting to you about some of my research and teaching work in the area of academic writing. I'll be demonstrating to you one of my software creations, a corpus linguistic analysis tool, also known as a data-driven learning tool called CorpusMate, which is designed to help you with academic writing across 20 different academic subjects. And I'll also be talking about how generative AI can also be used to help you master some of the key areas of academic writing. And I hope that you find the talk useful. I've come all the way in from Queensland, Australia, Brisbane, and I've been here in Brazil now for about a week and a half. So far I've had a wonderful time. I've taught children in schools, I've taught undergraduate students in big halls, and today I'm teaching 2 cameras in a studio. But of course I know that you're all sat wherever you are watching this presentation, and I do hope that you find it useful and interesting. So a little bit about me. Who am I? I'm currently, as I said, Associate Professor at the University of Queensland, Australia, which has a very strong link with Unesp. We've organised exchange visits with professors across many different subjects, and we hope that this collaboration will continue as we head into 2024 and beyond. My main areas of research are on English for academic purposes, English for specific purposes, corpus linguistics, and the intersection of all that called data-driven learning. I'm the editor of the Australian Review of Applied Linguistics journal and sit on the editorial boards of a number of other journals, including a former role as associate editor of English for Academic Purposes, which is like the world's biggest journal in that area. So we've seen and done a lot of research on this topic. So again, my research interests include corpus linguistics, and I'll explain in a little bit what that is for those of you in the audience who aren't familiar with that. Second language writing, and specifically English for academic purposes, second language acquisition, TESOL, and as a new research area of mine, looking at generative AI. This book here that you can see on the right is my most recent work in this area, published this year, about 2 weeks ago, and features a number of Unesp professors as well, Dr. Paolo Pinto and Adriane Ottano. So do check that out in your university library if you're able to do that. So corpus linguistics, what is that? A corpus is essentially a big collection of texts, and that collection might be on academic English, it might be on academic Portuguese, it might be on general English, it might be on stories, it might be on news broadcasts, it might be on presentations. And the idea that by collecting all of these texts in the millions or even billions of words, we can use special software to look at what's happening in those texts, work out some of the patterns of the language that is contained within them, extract some of those patterns and learn them and use them in teaching materials so that our students, whether that's you or whether you're a teacher or a researcher, you can understand those patterns and begin to use them in your writing or whatever kind of language related task you're trying to do. And corpus research spans so many different kinds of areas of language, including research articles, second language writing, grammar, different languages including Chinese, Korean, Portuguese, English for academic purposes, written and spoken discourse, you name it. If you can get data in that text data, in that format that you can run the software over it, you can start to do corpus linguistics right away. And corpora have been used in education for some time now. If you've read a major textbook on academic writing, maybe published by Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, or one of those major publishers, chances are that corpora have been used in designing those textbooks and choosing the vocabulary that is taught in different units, choosing the grammar, and so on. It's also widely used in standardized language tests like IELTS, and I have experience producing textbook series for IELTS for Cambridge University Press, again using corpus linguistics to choose the vocabulary and choose the grammar and to get authentic examples of language used in the textbooks for activities and more. But what we're interested in today is the intersection of teachers using En-Corpora, if you in the audience are teachers, and language learners, which again, many of you may well be. Teachers and learners using En-Corpora in the classroom is also known as data-driven learning. Now, data-driven learning works by exposure to language data, but not just like the Matrix, I suppose, if you remember that movie where the kind of data is kind of flowing down the screen like a green kind of rain, and you're not really making any sense of it. And what Corpus tools do, when we apply Corpus tools, which are these special kind of software, to Corpus data, you might see language that looks something like this. This is your typical concordance line, where you search for a word, maybe in this case the word results, which is a common academic word. You'll then be taken to many examples of that word in context, some information to the left of the word, some information to the right, many examples of how you might want to use that word in your own writing. Corpora also allow us to conduct some statistical work on language data. For example, here we can see the most frequent three-word combinations that appear in the particular data set of interest. For example, here, are shown in, show that the, obtained from the, with some information as to their frequency and their relative frequency in the corpus. And the idea behind usage-based approaches to language learning, as what we see in Corpora, are that usually the most frequent and most used language should be learned the first. We can also use Corpus tools to make searches by part of speech, so we can search for all verbs, we can search for all nouns and adjectives, we can search for combinations of these, and it's an incredibly powerful tool. And increasingly modern Corpus tools allow for new visualizations of language data for people for maybe whom concordances might be a little difficult to understand, and we can manipulate this data, we can click it, we can go further, we can bring it out, we can drag it back. And all of this kind of playing around with the data, looking at the language, coming to your own conclusions about some of the questions you might have, this is called data-driven learning. For academic writing, I've got quite a lengthy experience of producing corpus-based materials for academic writing. In my former career at the University of Hong Kong, I produced several books and study guides using Corpora to teach English for specific purposes. For example, the book here on the left documents the creation of an English for dentistry course at the University of Hong Kong, which at the time was the world's #1 dentistry faculty. This course booklet contained a number of activities which sought to combine the dentistry students' final projects with corpus-based activities that help them to understand some of the language they need to write their final reports. Similarly, an introduction to thesis writing booklet was taken by many thousands of students per semester to teach them some of the key language expressions that are used in different sections of a graduate or PhD level thesis or dissertation. We developed our own Corpus platform, which is still in use today. Users would search for a particular kind of information in the corpus, for example, a passive voice construction, shown here with the use of was and then any verb. You'll be then taken to numerous instances of that term with some information before or after. Also here, we've got information as to which words come before was, organized by their frequency in the corpus, which words come afterwards, again organized by their frequency. And these are some of the corpus-based teaching materials that we produce to help those students. Again, all of this taken from professional corpus of dentistry research reports we compiled and then made teaching materials from those. At the University of Queensland, one of the first things I did was to take advantage of a switch to online modes of teaching, which was necessitated by COVID-19. And I created my own course on data-driven learning training for English for academic purposes. And this course is actually available for anybody to take for free. If you go to the URL here, which maybe if you get the recording, you'll be able to see, or if you mail me, I'm happy to provide you with that, takes you to the course where you can enroll for an edX account for free. And there are 5 modules which take you through the basics of some really interesting corpus tools that focus on academic writing. And you can take that, go through the 5 modules, and you will receive a certificate of completion for passing all of the different assessment items there. So do check that out if you get the time. Similarly, working together with other staff at UNASP and with practicing teachers in Brazilian primary and secondary schools, we put together this book on lesson plans that involve corpus consultation, data-driven learning. So for the language teachers here in the audience, even those who are teaching academic writing, take a look at the book, follow the URL here. There are lessons for learners of different proficiency levels and lessons for people who are taking second language English, Portuguese, and Spanish. The book is found here, and there are example lessons, 15 example lessons contained within the book with various different approaches to the lesson, lessons where students have access to the corpus software, or maybe if you teach in a situation where students don't have access to technology inside the classroom, you can take the hands-off version, which will then give you that corpus data, but without the need for students to have their own devices. And this is a unique book which is already getting a lot of attention and interest by language teacher trainers around the world. Let's go back into our presentation. We know, therefore, based on a lot of research, that sometimes data-driven learning can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes you might be using a tool that was not really designed for teaching. You might be using corpus software that maybe is not academic in nature, or maybe you're using an academic corpus with students who are not trying to study academic English. So there are a number of issues with data-driven learning that we are aware of. Sometimes the user interface can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes the functions can be too complex, or we may have some issues with the data, as I already mentioned. One of the things then that I did as the result of work teaching academic writing to secondary school students in Queensland, Australia, was to develop my own corpus tool. During COVID, one of the things I did was to conduct a workshop at this school in the use of Corpora for data-driven learning. And some science teachers found me after the workshop and said that their students, even though most of them were native speakers of English, they had trouble with their academic writing because nobody is born with knowledge of academic writing. It's a skill that has to be learned and acquired. And the students found it really hard to use the passive voice construction properly in their research report writing. So the students would have to do some experiments in class and then write a research report about what they'd seen after. Now, the passive voice construction is really very frequently used in the methodology section and the results reporting section of research reports, but they were using these constructions in the wrong places, and they were often having trouble with selecting the correct verbs for the passive voice construction. So we trained them in the use of data-driven learning. We gave them some of the most popular corpus tools that were available at the time. For example, the Sketch Engine for Language Learning platform, or SKEL, which you can Google and find on your own. the Sketch Engine platform, and the Lingual platform. And again, all of these are searchable online. We gave them some pre-tests and some post-tests in understanding and use of the passive voice construction. And we also gave them the opportunity to write their research reports and to mark on those reports with different colors whether they'd used any kind of software to help them to write it. So if they used Google Translate, then maybe they used a yellow color. If they used a Corpus tool, maybe they used a purple color. And what did we find? We found that over time, after about 6 months, the students were much better at writing the passive voice construction. They wrote it more frequently, they wrote it more accurately, and they wrote it in places where they were supposed to. And this was, we think, as a result of using corpora and understanding how the language works by consulting academic corpora and doing so. We also found that when it came to revising their work across multiple drafts, they tended to use corpus tools to do this more than some of the other traditional tools they used to rely on. However, one problem was that towards the end, we sent them a survey 3 months after we had last seen them. And unfortunately, many of the students still reported that they were not continuing to use corpus tools because the tools that we'd exposed them to maybe were a little bit too complex, or that were not giving them the kind of information that they wanted to see. So with this in mind, we took it upon ourselves to develop a new tool, and that is the CorpusMate platform. This is developed by myself here on the right, and a professor in the Czech Republic called Vít Bajza, who has experience developing other similar tools for corpus linguistics. The CorpusMate platform, at the moment, for those people who are watching at home, usually you can just go into Google and just type corpusmate.com, and for some reason it's suddenly working, whereas like 5 minutes ago it wasn't working. But that's the danger of live broadcast, I suppose, but lucky for you. We've got here the main site for CorpusMate. You can see it's very simple in its user interface, looks very similar to Google. I can search for any term within the 40 million word collection that CorpusMate contains, and I can search for examples of how that word is used. I got filters for 20 different academic subjects, including science, history, education, politics, and engineering. I can conduct searches across spoken or written registers, and I can also conduct searches across academic and general registers. When I search for a term, I will be taken to the concordance screen, and the concordance screen gives me these results. The results are organized by the most frequent 4-word combination in which my search term appears. So in this case, I've chosen the word assess. The most frequent 4-word combination of assess is assess the impact of. The second most frequent construction is assess the effect of, assess the quality of, and more. And if I want to see those examples, I can just click on the right-hand side here, the little down arrow, and it will give me all of the examples of that term. There, if I want to know how assess the impact of is used, I can read the different examples here and get a better idea about how it is used and when it is used. I can also switch the results to see the patterns to the left of the term assess. In this case, I can now see that the most frequent 4-word construction involving assess is in order to assess, followed by was used to assess, were used to assess, and again I can click the examples. Another thing that I can do, which is very useful function of corpus data, is to actually click a given result, and I can see exactly where that result was taken from. So the first result was taken from a corpus called the British Academic Written English Corpus, which is a 6 million word corpus of academic English taken from the UK. The second hit here takes me to a real research paper, in this case chemical group dependent plasma polymerization. Yeah, I'm not even going to try and say the rest of that, as I'm not from the sciences. But if I wanted to get a citation for that article, I've got the option to click this button. It will take me to Google Scholar, and it will take me to the paper where the given result was taken from. Then, of course, if I want to cite that in my own work in APA, I can just copy and paste what I have here. And this is a function that those secondary school students asked us for, something that they were very keen to see in the new software. If reading concordances is too tricky, I can always switch to sentence mode. In here, I'm taken to complete kind of passages that contain the word that I'm looking for, with some information about the school subject or discipline and whether it is spoken or written register or mode. Moreover, if I want to display more context, I can click the expand button, and this will provide an extra sentence for any given passage. And I believe I can do this up to 3 or 4 times, depending on how much text is being displayed already. And again, this is something that those younger learners doing their academic writing were very keen on looking at. If I click the pattern finder button, I've got the ability to then see those patterns, in this case the left patterns, just at the touch of a button. So in this case I can clearly see was used to assess is the most frequent 4-word combination that appears to the left. If I switch to the right patterns, I can click assess the impact of. I can see this appears 61 times. All of these are clickable, of course, to take me straight to those results. And then, of course, I can filter my search according to the specific school subject or academic discipline that I'm interested in. I can also click distribution by topic. This will then, if I need to remove the topic filter, allow me to see at a glance which academic subject a given word is more likely to appear in than not. So disciplinary subjects where the bar is shown in a kind of turquoise color means that the word assess is more likely to be used in those academic disciplines. For example, psychology is the top hit, followed by engineering, health and medicine, geography, culture, agriculture and the environment. So the word assess is very likely to be used in those, whereas disciplines with the red bar shown here, for example, history, mathematics, science, tend not to use that term in comparison with the others. I can also get a visualization about the written and spoken distribution of those documents, as well as the academic or general distribution as well. So I can see the term assess is 99% likely to be used in academic text versus general English, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. There are numerous other functions with CorpusMate that unfortunately I don't have time to show you today in a 1-hour session, but I do hope that you do get the chance to have a play with that now, maybe while you're listening to the rest of the lecture. So the CorpusMate tool has already been embedded into the English for academic purposes that I run, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels in Australia. Students will have a 13-week program, and one of the weeks in that program is dedicated to the use of Corpus tools for improving academic writing. Similarly, these are some of the kind of activities that our students would be taken through. So they would be given access to the CorpusMate platform and made to answer some of the questions here, getting them to play around with some of the operator functions of corpus queries in CorpusMate. For example, the wildcard operator, which gives you any word where the star is found. The slash operator, which gives you results of words to either side of the slash. So you could have, for example, academic writing / writers, and you can see whether the term appears more often with writing or whether the term appears more often with writers. Similarly, the question mark operator allows you to see if a word in a given phrase or expression is necessary, or maybe it could be taken out. So a common error that our students make is evaluate on the results. Do we need the word on there? I can put the question mark next to on, and it will give me the answers for evaluate on the results and evaluate the results. And from that, I can make a decision about which expression I want to try to use. Similarly, other kinds of questions you might like to ask. CorpusMate on academic writing. Is you more likely to be used in writing or speaking? Is the word attitude more likely to be used in the social sciences or the hard sciences? And then in which disciplines are certain terms more or less likely to be used? So whatever kind of linguistic problem or question you might have, we train our students to develop corpus queries to solve these kind of questions, go into the Corpus software and use them to develop their own writing and knowledge of academic vocabulary. So that leads me to the kind of halfway point now where I have to introduce generative AI. And obviously since late 2022, generative AI has threatened to overshadow a lot of the work that we do in corpus linguistics on data-driven learning. Because what you have now is where instead of having to go into corpus software, try to make sense of concordance lines and do a lot of that self-analysis that is so important for data-driven learning, a lot of students now can just go to ChatGPT, say, write me a 250-word paragraph on this subject. They'll then take the output from ChatGPT, copy and paste that into their work. So don't pretend you haven't done it, because I'm sure that everybody in the room probably has, myself included. But what's important here is that's not necessarily a competition. There are certain things that corpus tools will continue to do very well and that generative AI cannot do very well. But there are other things that generative AI can do very well that can actually help corpus linguists and people trying to do data-driven learning to get better results than they might have got previously. So if we think about what generative AI is at the fundamental level, it's actually very similar to corpus linguistics in that generative AI works on a huge set of training data, a corpus. The corpus is probably trillions of words in size, scraped from the internet or who knows where else they got the data from. And then they use natural language processing techniques, machine learning techniques, and the transformer, which is the T in ChatGPT, to make a predictive model which tells you which word is more likely to come after another word, and on the basis of that statistical calculation, generate, that's the G in GPT, text that responds to the user's prompt or whatever you provide it with. So the term I use is that generative AI is essentially doing something very similar to corpus linguistics, but it's doing it on steroids at a rate of processing power that previously and data size that previously corpus linguistics has struggled to do. However, for those of you thinking, well, we don't need to do corpus linguistics now, we don't need to do data-driven learning, there is still a continued case for using Corpora over generative AI, especially if you're in a school situation and you're working with students, whether they're at the secondary school level, whether they're at the university level. Some of the things you might want to think about is that with corpus linguistics, we know exactly the texts that came into that corpus. And as you saw with CorpusMate, we can actually click and be taken to the exact research papers where that line came from. Corpus data is also authentic in that it was actually produced by humans. Corpus findings are replicable. whenever we search for something, we should get exactly the same result every single time. CorpusMate and other similar corpus tools are safe in that we know what the output's going to be. We can be sure that the information that's contained in the corpus data is true and that students are not going to be led one way or another with the machine hallucinating. But also that the kind of learning we do in data-driven learning is very intensive. We get to analyze language data, we get to manipulate it, we make hypotheses about some of the things we believe about language, and we test those hypotheses to see if they're true. It's a very active approach to learning, whereas generative AI, if used badly, if used incorrectly, is more of a passive process. So I'll talk a little bit about each of these in turn. As mentioned, we know 100% where the data came from when it comes to corpora and corpus linguistics. We can extract the full text. We can generate citations of the original work. And because we can make our own corpora, so say for example, if you're a student of electrical engineering, you get a collection of electrical engineering research papers, you turn that into a corpus, you use some corpus software to analyze that. That is something that is really super useful because you know yourself where those files came from, what is in that collection, and you can be 100% sure that you trust that data. Unlike ChatGPT, for example, where if you give it a prompt and say, you are a professor of electrical engineering, please give me some useful language about that. Yes, it might give you something that looks like that, but can you be really sure that that is exactly what it is? And I think the answer at the moment is still no. Not only that, but at a fundamental level, corpus data is essentially language that has been used by a real person at some point in time. The output by generative AI, however, is merely the result of a very advanced statistical model, and it's a predictive language process. But very often, although those predictions can be very, very good, they can also result in things that are incorrect. They may result in sentences that no one would ever say in real life, or that are too academic or not academic enough as compared to what an authentic human doing academic writing might ordinarily produce. Therefore, we say that corpus data is still significantly more authentic than the language that is produced by generative AI, at least at this point in time. A very important factor, as I mentioned, is that corpus results are replicable. When you search for something in a corpus, you'll get the same results every time. Why is that important? Well, if we think about it, say for example, you're working with a class full of 30 students. You all want all of those 30 students to go through the same process and to get the same answers from the data. But with generative AI, due to the way that the system works, it's not really possible to do that. For example, I have a master's student at the moment who's done a paper talking about generative AI's corrective feedback on second language writing. So we gave generative AI, or ChatGPT specifically, some texts from students that contained errors. We asked the software to correct those errors using a special prompt that we piloted. But we noticed that ChatGPT, its response to the feedback was quite different almost every single time you asked. So sometimes ChatGPT would correct only some of the errors, in this case errors of prepositions. But using the same text and the same prompt, in the next chat window, ChatGPT then began to correct many other things. And aside from this, sometimes it will rewrite the whole text for you and give you the original version, or sometimes not, or it will do a combination of all of these things. So if you're working with a class of students, that can be pretty unreliable. Many teachers in the Australian context working with us at the primary, secondary and even university levels were also worried that uploading student data, writing produced by children, for example, into ChatGPT could breach data privacy and safety law in Australia. On the other hand, corpus linguistics, tools like CorpusMate, we don't ask for any kind of login. We don't ask you to upload anything. Nothing is stored. It's a comparatively safe tool to use. Generative AI, as many of you probably are already aware, frequently hallucinates. Because it is a predictive model and doesn't really have knowledge or common sense of its own, it will say things that are completely unbelievable, but believe them to be true. For example, one history teacher that we work with in Australia asked ChatGPT to say 10 wonderful, amazing things about Joseph Stalin, and it did so without hesitation. And imagine that was put then in the hands of a young student who then believes everything that is written by the software. So this is a big problem. And not only that, but hallucinations are bad enough for English. When you're thinking about languages other than English, maybe for example Portuguese, or languages with non-English scripts like Mandarin or Korean, the potential for hallucinations is even worse. I already mentioned that corpus consultation is by nature an active approach to learning. It's a cognitively demanding task, requires significant inductive learning processes, so say published research. But when you're using ChatGPT, and if you're being really honest with yourself, are you doing the work or is the software doing the work? And I think for a good majority of cases, we might try to over-rely on ChatGPT doing all of the analysis instead of you being the one to do the analysis and coming to conclusions about language on your own. And if you had to pick a side, I think you'd want to pick the one where you're doing more of the analysis and more of the learning and leave less of the effort to the software. That said though, there are a number of really wonderful opportunities for generative AI to help improve the learning of languages, particularly academic English. We know that corpus linguistics is a useful tool, but there are ways that generative AI can really help boost what we've been trying to do in data-driven learning for some years. I'll go through each of these in turn. Obviously, ChatGPT could not be simpler to use. You simply tell the software what you want in plain language, and it will give it right back to you. So instead of trying to generate a complicated corpus query, we can now ask it, for example, can you list a few example sentences including the phrase I'm interested in? What is a more formal equivalent of this word? Or what are some similar words to this word? This means that almost anybody can pick up ChatGPT and start to ask it language-related questions and be reasonably confident that the answer that they get is going to be okay at this level of analysis and detail. Not only that, but using ChatGPT could not be easier. It's a simple chat window. You can use plain language. It is not a complex tool to use. It could not be easier in form or function. And that's one of the reasons why ChatGPT has become so popular around the world. If your great-grandmother could use it, the chances are that everybody around could probably use it as well. And that's the test I usually apply to new technology. A main advantage of generative AI is its ability to differentiate content or teaching materials or assessments to suit specific groups of learners or needs. Differentiation is a concept that is very important in the Australian national curriculum, particularly for teachers who work with students of English as an additional language or dialect. One of the things that corpus data doesn't do very well is that sometimes the corpus data can be too high level, so that students of lower proficiencies may struggle to understand some of the patterns that they found. But if I copy and paste those results into ChatGPT and ask them to produce similar but simpler results, that's something that ChatGPT, generative AI, will do very easily and just at the push of a button. Not only that, if I wanted to make some of the examples more difficult or more academic, I can ask ChatGPT to do that as well. So this idea that using generative AI allows us to be able to differentiate some of the results we get from corpus data to suit more higher level learners or beginner learners at the touch of a button is a really important step in helping us do the kind of things we want to do. For example, we've completed a project in Australia where we collected generative AI prompts from teachers across 30 different schools in the state. And these were some of the example prompts that they were providing. For example, explain the concept of dystopia, which is quite an advanced level concept, to a student with a reading age of 9.5 years, which would be quite less than that of your standard Year 9 class, who would presumably be between 13 and 14 years old. Other examples, students with a low comprehension level, students with disabilities or impairments in writing, and getting the platform to differentiate the content in this way is super useful. Not only that, but one of the more difficult things that if we want language teachers to adopt corpus-based language teaching, data-driven learning, is taking corpus data and then transitioning that to teaching materials, activities, or exercises. But that's something that ChatGPT generative AI can do pretty much instantly. So I can take some corpus data, run some analysis on it, do some data-driven learning, get that output, feed that into ChatGPT and say, now give me 10 multiple choice quiz questions about this data, and it will do it at the touch of a button, and it will also give you the answers as well. Or you can ask it to generate a lesson plan based on some of those words that you've extracted from the corpus data, and it will quite happily do that in about 5 seconds. So just to finish off the talk for today, with CorpusMate, En-Corpora, Corpus Linguistics, Data-Driven Learning, our goal is to provide learners with simple, free, fast, and effective linguistic analysis tools that are going to help teachers and students of academic writing, general writing, English, Portuguese, Chinese, to be able to investigate language on their own, do this in a way that is structured and fun, especially in a classroom context when you're working with your friends or when you're working with the teacher to solve some of these tasks that we might set for you. And I myself have used this in all of my academic writing programs, whether that's textbook publishing in Hong Kong, in Australia, and some of the work we've also done here at Unesp as well. Now, obviously, we now have generative AI as well to help us. We don't necessarily see this as a competition. We believe that corpus linguistics and data-driven learning still has advantages that I've mentioned in today's talk, but then also that by combining what we do with language corpora and generative AI, we can take the advantages of both and help to overcome the disadvantages of both as well at the same time. Not leveraging generative AI risks leaving data-driven learning out in the cold, but by completely replacing data-driven learning with generative AI, we run the risk of a passive approach to learning and one that is filled with error, hallucination, and doubt about the findings that we might get. So by putting them together, I think we can really bring about the best of both worlds and lead to several really important technology-assisted ways to boost your academic writing. And we hope that go ahead, use these tools, have a play around with them, use some of the materials that we've developed, use the CorpusMate platform, use the academic writing course. It's all there freely available for you to use. Give us your feedback, let us know how you got on, send me a mail anytime, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. We'll now leave it open to questions, and I believe there might be some questions in the YouTube chat, and apparently there's no questions for now. But we've got a little bit of time, so maybe if there are people in the audience who do have any questions, we'll have some time to take them. Thank you. So, the question here, are there any issue with employing AI to enhance the language in an article? Would it be discernible as authored by AI? So, it's not an easy question to answer because there are a number of different contexts and situations where this might occur. If I put on my journal editor's hat, and remember that I sit on the editorial boards of a number of key journals, so if you're basically working as a researcher submitting an article to a journal, journals very often have now guidelines in their publishing instructions to say that not that you shouldn't be using generative AI to maybe tidy up some of the language in the paper, but that you acknowledge that you're using generative AI only to do that, and not that you're using it to replace ideas or content with the thoughts of generative AI. So that's at the level of publishing. At the university level, there are different kinds of guidelines and rules that are set by individual universities. My university, University of Queensland, for example, gives you multiple options as a course coordinator. So for some courses, use of generative AI can be a 100% banned, like you're just simply not allowed to use it. In other courses or assessments, maybe it can be used, but you have to acknowledge that it was used and write down some instructions about exactly how and where it was used. And then some assessments just say, you may use it if you wish, but obviously your ideas and content should still be your own. And so far, I think this seems to be working. It's obvious sometimes that students might submit work that was copied and pasted from generative AI, but very often you kind of know as a professor or a teacher, if your student is struggling to put together 2 sentences in their spoken communication, but then suddenly they submitted something that's better than what I could write, then chances are that there's a problem and we need to talk to that student about that. But it's still a work in progress. I think institutions around the world all have same kind of issue here, and it's something that in time we may have a better answer for. But at the moment, it's still very much case-by-case basis. So the next question here from Paula, how can graduate students learn academic collocations with CorpusMate? Well, of course, that's exactly one of the things that it does. So by typing in an academic word, for example, results, searching for that term in the data, finding the patterns, we can easily see the collocates of the term results. We can play around with these by clicking on, for example here, results are consistent with, appears highly frequently in the corpus. And remember that frequency is a clue that is that A, it is an authentic and real collocation in the data set. And also, because it's frequent, it might be one that is used highly in academic writing, in whatever kind of specific subject that you are working with. If I click here, results are consistent with, I can get more information on collocation. For example here, results are consistent with the idea that. Results are consistent with a model in which. Results are consistent with the results of previous studies. And these are all authentic academic expressions that I have found in just 2 clicks using CorpusMate. So I hope that gives you some clue. Are there any kind of future projects by CorpusMate to insert an AI checker in the website? I wouldn't be inserting an AI checker, but something that a very good friend of mine called Lawrence Anthony has done in his corpus tool, Ent-Conc. He has now developed the ability to embed a ChatGPT API key into his corpus tool. So in the beta release version 4.3.0, as you can see here, if you have the paid version of ChatGPT, you can copy and paste the API key from ChatGPT, use it in this corpus tool, and then when you upload your corpus into the tool, instead of asking a corpus query like I did a moment ago, you can ask it as you would ask something in ChatGPT. So you could say, what are the most frequent nouns in my corpus? What are the most frequent nouns in my corpus? As a proper question, it will then analyze your corpus using the same technology as ChatGPT and give you that answer in plain language. So this is already the first attempt where a researcher, a programmer has already now embedded AI, generative AI, into a corpus tool, and maybe soon, for example, if OpenAI decide to give us a free version of ChatGPT one day that we can use in this platform, maybe if they release GPT-6, then they might give us GPT 3.5 for free to use and to be able to take that data, then I might think then about being able to embed that into CorpusMate. So no plans to do it right now because there's a cost involved and we want the tool to be free at the point of use, but certainly in the near future, that is something that I would love to see. Okay, another question. How can the analysis of large text corpora through corpus linguistics help AI models better understand the nuances of human language, like ambiguity and cultural references? It's a really good question. If we think that these analyses of text corpora through corpus linguistics have been going on now for 3 decades or more, and we already have a great deal of information about how language works in this way, for example, cultural references and ambiguity. And the results of those research have influenced the people who work on natural language processing applications, for example, parsing, tagging, sentiment analysis, and many other different applications that actually find their way into generative AI applications like ChatGPT. So what ChatGPT does in terms of large language models is that with the corpus data traditionally being a fair amount smaller than what you might get in a large language model, which runs into the trillions of words, but essentially it's still doing very much a similar kind of process as you would be getting in corpus linguistics. It's just that you're getting it at a level of statistical power and processing speed that corpus linguistics has traditionally struggled to do. So I think it's a question that we already have some of that information from corpus linguistics. That information does feed itself into some of these natural language processing applications that underlie generative AI. And these researchers are all talking with each other and they're sharing their findings. Then, of course, you've also got the human element in giving feedback to applications like ChatGPT, which can also help it to better understand some of those nuances of human language that you mentioned there. So I believe that that was the time for all the questions. It's been my pleasure to present this session online for UNSP. This is actually my final speaking event for UNSP during my 2-week stay here. It's been a great experience and I hope to come back very soon. I'm sure that please go ahead and use any of the tools or courses that I've shared with you here. Give me your feedback and I look forward to hearing from you soon. If you're ever in Australia, you come up to Queensland, come to our university, come and find me and I'll buy you a coffee. It'd be great to see any of my Brazilian friends come to visit. Thank you very much.